Hi, I'm Dave Henning with the Fresh Start Company, fresh ideas for business and personal growth. And today I'm super excited to have my guest, David Fradin, the president of Spice Catalyst. Spice Cadillacs. No, it isn't. It's Spice Catalyst. That's another company building insanely great products on Amazon. You were an author and consultant on product success. Went to University of Michigan. I like that. I just interviewed somebody really cool from Michigan as well. Bachelor of Science, and you've got an MBA from the Graduate School of Business. Thank you, David, for being here.
Glad with you putting up with me.
And I guess you got the memo that it's Red Shirt Day, so thanks for wearing your red shirt.
Horizontal stripes required.
Let's see. What am I here? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, mine's Denver University, where my grandson graduated from, out in Denver, obviously enough.
San Francisco 49ers Super Bowl champs for 2021.
Oh, fantastic. And you were one of the first 7 students in a new program supported by the National Science Foundation to develop technically trained managers, courses in interviewing, surveying, polling, journalism, interpersonal, and interorganizational behavior. You got the whole ball of wax, it sounds like. Tell us a little bit more about your background and what you're doing nowadays. And you've got a ton of great Silicon Valley stories to share today. What would you like to talk about first?
Well, in terms of my background, I started in aerospace engineering at the University of Michigan. I was bored after about 3 weeks, so I started the flying club there and went to a reunion just a few years ago, and the club has trained over 5,000 pilots worldwide. Many airline captains learned to fly at the University of Michigan Flyers, including the head of the Blue Angels. And my aerospace engineering professor thought that since I could organize a flying club with no money, he was on Lyndon Johnson's Supersonic Transport Advisory Committee. So he asked me if I could start a national student organization in support of American SST called FAST, Fly America's SST. So by the time I was done with my sophomore year, I had gone to meetings at the White House in my polyester suit, testified on Capitol Hill, flew down with Spiro Agnew to the Apollo 15 launch, I think it was, or 17, one of those, and realized that where things are at is not working at a battleship desk from World War II in a pool of engineers at Boeing or Pratt & Whitney or something like that, that a lot of it has to do with politics, because in politics, it's who gets what. It's the decisions of who gets what. So at that same time, Cy Ramo, the R out of TRW, was inspired to get a interdisciplinary, technically trained management curriculum together. And that's what the National Science Foundation funded. And it turned out to be essentially a lot of the skill sets required for product management and product marketing, which is the thing that I focus on now, is doing that on a consulting basis and also doing it on a training basis. My number one client is Cisco worldwide, and I've trained about a third of all the product managers at Cisco over the last 10 years.
That's fantastic. While you were down there at Cape Canaveral with the launch, I was working at Kodak processing all of the NASA film in the film testing department. And at that time, it was still kind of top secret stuff and it wasn't public, but we actually I was in the camera club, so I could borrow a Super 8 projector and take this movie home and show it to my family of the rocket launch when nobody else had it out public at that time. So you've really had some amazing influence and connections for sure. That's just fantastic. My father served in World War II in England and France in the intelligence department as a teletype operator. So we really appreciate all that you've done for aerospace for sure. My father gave me a love of airplanes, and we had to go out to a private airport and watch the planes take off and land for hours right after we got our ice cream cone as little boys.
My dad was in World War II also. He never went overseas except for serving in Guantanamo Bay. And he knew how to type, so they made him a clerk. And he wrote a bunch of letters home to his family. He was one of 6 siblings. And I have all those letters, and he was a very good humor writer. So I'm going to publish his letters. He always wanted to get published, but was afraid of getting rejected by proposing a book or an article. So I'll honor him by publishing his letters. His name was Hyman, Hyman. His father was the blacksmith to the governor of Kiev, Ukraine, who was told to leave by the governor. He gave him $200 in 1914 because he said, they're going to kill you. And there had been 6 Holocausts in the Ukraine over the previous 100 years. So he knew that that was a pretty good certainty. So the title of the book will be Letters for My Heidi. And I said, I was a good humor writer, but I grew up to become a master plumber.
Well, that is very inspiring and a story that needs to be told for sure. I would love to read that once you have a chance to get that published and out in the market.
What I'm going to do, he served in, I think it was South Carolina at one of the bases there. And since he knew Yiddish, which is very close to German, he was an interpreter for German prisoner of war interrogations. Before that, he joined the Marines in like 1941 or so, and they kicked him out because he had flat feet, and wandered the streets of Washington, D.C. for a few months. And it was very embarrassing for what appeared to be an able-bodied young man not being in the war. And I found out later, I always asked him, why didn't the Jews do much about Hitler? Well, it turns out 600,000 Jews served in the armed forces from the United States during World War II. That was a massive contribution to the Allies' effort. And so what I'm going to do is write a little research and write a little history of each of the bases that he served at and what was going on at the time that he was writing these letters home, and then present the actual letter along with my dad's humor.
That is amazing. Wow. And so how long have you been in the Silicon Valley? For many years now, right?
I moved here from Minnesota in 1980.
Minnesota. You have to say that correctly, right? And you have worked with for Apple and for HP. And tell us some of the interesting Silicon Valley stories that you actually, Steve Wozniak was actually worked with you at one point.
Oh, he worked for me. I was his boss.
Okay.
I tried to stay as far away from that nutcase Steve Jobs as possible. Steve, there was 2 Steves. There was the bad Steve, which we knew at Apple in the early 80s. And then there was the good Steve that finally had all his failures behind him, and he learned from that. And I also found, as I was researching my book, Building and Scaling Great Products, which you mentioned is on Amazon worldwide, including in Vietnam. It's in Vietnamese. That Steve sought out and was mentored by David Packard at HP. Oh. And when I joined HP, I was in the corporate PR department. And one of the responsibilities I had was handling Dave Packard's personal PR when he was chairman of the board of the HP board of directors. So he learned a lot of humility that he apparently brought back with him to Apple, including one of the things that Packard did for HP. He said, when there's a downturn, when there's a recession, we should double down and spend more money than our competitors on research and development. So when the recession ended, we could come flying out of that recession with lots of new products, because 20% of HP's products were products that were introduced within the last 5 years. And Steve followed that advice during the 2007, 2008 recession. And that's why Apple has just exploded in growth to become the most valuable company in the world now.
Now, which Steve are we talking about?
The good one. Steve Jobs, the second Steve Jobs.
Oh, gotcha. I see. Yes.
Steve Wozniak got bored very easily and seldom could finish a project. He got one of his assignments was to write the Apple disk operating system so that instead of storing your data on a cassette tape off the Apple II, you could store it on a Shugart floppy disk. And to incentivize him to get the job done, they told him, if you get it done in time, you can go to Comdex, the big computer expose in Las Vegas. And he'd never been to Las Vegas before. So he got Apple DOS finished in 3 weeks.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. And floppy disks and DOS, wow, we're talking some language there. It goes way back. And then hard disk drives for personal computers. You were involved directly with those products as well, or?
Yeah, I was hired into product management at Apple, into the disk drive division called the peripherals division. And my responsibility was to bring to market the first hard disk drive on a personal computer. It was a wonderful product. It was about 15 inches wide, about 6 inches tall, about 8 inches deep. It had a Seagate ST506 hard drive in it. It was an enormous size. It was 5 megabytes. Nobody could understand how they would ever use up 5 megabytes, which is the equivalent of 43 floppy disks at the time. And it was really, really cheap. It was only $3,600. And it was my job to bring that to market. And the company noticed that I knew how to manage, so they asked me to take over as the Apple III product manager. And I became the group product manager for the Apple III, which the company had botched its introduction about 2 years earlier, along with some mechanical problems where the chips would work loose while in shipment, and you'd have to drop the thing a foot in order to reseat the chips. A bad manufacturing, bad design. So my job was to kind of reintroduce the product. But Steve Jobs, that is, with his great, tremendous vision of seeing what the market would be 7 years in advance, figured it'd be a good idea to kill the product line so he would have room in the marketplace for his beloved Macintosh, which he had not yet shipped. So the executive committee went off to Pajara Dunes down by Monterey and canceled the product line. And a couple, 3 weeks later, I was coming out of the Mariotti office building, which is on D'Anza Boulevard near Highway 280, which was the corporate headquarters at the time. So that's the place where Steve Jobs would used to park his Mercedes in the handicapped parking spot, to the chagrin of everybody else. And as I was leaving, a lady ran out who was the marketing director for the division, by the name of Ida Cole, and she called me into a meeting with what was his name, John Sculley, the president, the chief financial officer, and Joe Graziano, and Del Yoakum, who was the manufacturing manager. And Sculley turned to me and said, "Dave, we got a problem." I said, "What do you mean we have a problem?" He says, "We have 20 million piece parts for the Apple III spread between our Dallas and Singapore manufacturing facilities. What should we do about it?" And I said, "What do you mean we, paleface?" And he didn't laugh. He hadn't heard the joke. So I explained the joke to him that back in the 50s and 60s, there was a television show immensely popular called The Lone Ranger. And he wore white clothes and had a black mask, and a white hat, rode a white horse called Trigger. And he had a sidekick by the name of Tonto, an Indian. And then when I tell this story to Indians, I have to say an American Indian. And so they're driving, galloping through the desert, and they get surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming American Indians. And a Lone Ranger turns to Tonto and says, "Tonto, we're surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming Indians, and all they want to do is scalp us. What should we do?" And Tonto, who's an American Indian, realizing that he's surrounded by 10,000 other American Indians, says, "What do you mean, we, paleface?"
I remember that.
I said, "God, you canceled the product line. You created this $20 million. By the way, that'd be about $1/3 billion today. I had nothing to do with it. You didn't ask me for my opinion. You made me fully responsible for the product authority to do anything about it. Like if I wanted to do a promotion, I had to go through 8 levels of bureaucracy just to be able to get the message out on the retail floor." So he said, "Well, what should we do?" I said, "Well, if you give me the authority commensurate with responsibility, I'll get the job done." like my flying club, like this national student organization in favor of SST. And we later went on to lobby for the space shuttle. That one we were successful on. And I told him the story, The Soul of a New Machine, where I forget the name of the company, Alpha Data General or something like that, wanted to build a mini computer, but it was constantly being killed in their Boston offices. So they sent the engineers down to Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, Durham, and IBM did the same thing. They sent their PC team down to Boca Raton, Florida. And my friend and acquaintance, Kelly Johnson, who ran the Lockheed Skunk Works out in the desert of the Palm Desert, and he could come out with an advanced aircraft like the XR-71, the X-1, and those kinds of planes in 18 months. But the bureaucracy of Lockheed would normally take about 7 years. So he says, yes, that's a good idea. He used to be the president of Pepsi America, lived in Connecticut, and his next door neighbor was the president of Canon USA. And he asked it was the Xerox president that lived there. And they were at a party, and Sculley asked the president of Xerox, how come you don't have a personal copier like Canon does? He says, Canon put 10 of their best engineers on it and left them alone. We put 100 of our engineers on it. We might ship in a couple years. So Sculley asked me to make him a proposal. I did, presented it to the executive committee of Apple July 5th, 1983, a day that will live in infamy, at least in my mind. And the final decision came down to an issue of values. Would the cancellation of the product line meet the values of good management, empathy for the customers, technical contribution, and those types of things? And so shutting it down would definitely not meet those criteria, especially since the product line was selling well, it was profitable, it was producing enough profit to employ about 1,500 Apple employees. It was producing profit to help fund the venture funding necessary for Steve Jobs' Macintosh. And the vice president of sales and marketing, Floyd Kwame, near the end of the meeting said, Dave, you've presented us with 5 options that we can present, or we can make a decision from. If we make the decision to cancel the product line right now, versus if we make the decision to give you the authority to let the market decide whether or not the product should be discontinued, and you got a call from a dealer, what would you say? I said, if you decided to do the wise thing and let the market decide if the product is worthwhile continuing, I would tell the dealer that, and I'll tell them that we'll continue to enhance the product, support the product, market the product, so long as you, the dealer, continue to sell it and support it. But if you guys decide to cancel the product line right now, and it was kind of unsaid that that would be in violation of the values we all agreed on. And sitting in the back of the room was Ann Bowers, who was our VP of HR. And I didn't find out until later she was married to Bill Noyce, one of the founders of Intel. I said, if you decide to shut the product line right now, I'll give the dealer your phone number.
I love it. Oh, yeah. Brilliant. Bureaucracy and corporate stuff is not my cup of tea. So the last corporation I worked at, I fired my boss.
Well, they called me up a week later. They gave me a head count of 17 people. That's where they manage things by head count, which is the wrong way to do it. So a secretary making $30,000 a year was counted as a head count versus a product architect, which might be at $80,000 a year in that time. But anyway, they gave me 17 people. They gave me the bottom floor of the first offices for Apple on Banley Avenue. The whole first floor was mine, except for a room next door where the Mac operating system was being developed. And they gave me $4 million. They said, go see what you can do. So we sold 25,000 Apple IIIs in 11 months, generated about $600 million in corporate profits. And then when the company was against the product line the whole time, mainly because there was a bunch of MBAs that never conceived that there were market segments, which we now recognize as small office, home office, and small and medium business. But back then, those market segments had not been identified. So since the MBAs did not know about those market segments, they figured there was no market for this product, which was selling extremely well into small businesses worldwide. So I shot the thing down in April of 1984, the same day that the Apple IIc was introduced, so that nobody on Wall Street would care, and they didn't, and the stock price went up after that. And transitioned all of the developers to Guy Kawasaki so that they could continue their software on the Macintosh and continue to get a return for their investment. In contrast to that, a couple of years later, actually a year and a half later, when Steve was given management in addition to the Mac product line, the Lisa product line, he reveled in the bloodthirsty desire to cancel publicly and humiliate anybody that worked on Lisa. He did that, and the stock price plummeted as a result of that.
So what I hear you saying is that there's a certain amount of a dimming effect of the brilliance of all the geniuses who run companies in many cases because they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, especially at that time. And they didn't have the concept of a cash cow, which is what the Apple III was. It was a mature product producing good profits. And you milk that cow for as long as you can, according to the Boston Consulting Group, which of course didn't write the cash cow concept for another 4 or 5 years. Steve eventually lost his job at Apple because he had decimated Lisa. And by January of 1985, Apple only sold 4 Macintoshes. And I think Steve was gone within 3 or 4 months after that.
Was it Sculley and his board that got rid of Steve, or was that the next guy? Wasn't it?
Yeah, oh, they got rid of Steve. Steve tried to have a what do you call it? An overthrow to get rid of John, but the board backed John and asked Steve to go find something else to do. And all of this revolves around values, the corporate values of Apple, realizing that you have to have the value. If you have the value of empathy for your customer, and I think Ed Bowers played a great role in writing these Apple values, building on Intel's values and HP's values, called the HP way, that if you have loyal customers, a company needs to return that loyalty to that customer and not just say, screw you, and walk away. A good example of that is a few years ago, Reed Hastings, the president founder of Netflix, which is just down the street from where we are now, and he decided to increase the price for the CDs, the DVDs that were mailed out, and split off the games that you used to be able to get, or something to that effect. I don't remember exactly. And I was an early Netflix customer, and I thought that was pretty disloyal to have trapped me like that, and then arbitrarily raised the price. And the stock price dropped as a result of that from about $150 a share to about $50 a share. And didn't recover until several years later when they decided to get into the content and the streaming business big time. So that's another example of, in order for a company to succeed long term, is you have to demonstrate loyalty to your customers the same way they demonstrate it to you. That's what Amazon does, and that's why Amazon has been so successful. That's what Apple does, and that's why Apple has been so successful over the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah, so it's an interesting concept to think that the customers might actually say, yes, we want what you're dishing out, or no, we're not interested. And what a crazy concept to listen to your customers and see what they're interested in. Of course, Jobs, the genius of the iPhone and all these other products, you know, the iPod and everything going up through this whole cycle of marketing, was he came up with a way to charge outrageously high prices for something that he was able to communicate the value of it and get away with it. So people will be in line at the Apple store on University Avenue for a couple blocks down the street when something is coming out. The loyal Apple customers, I mean, they're, super loyal. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And that's part of the key. I remember once, just a few years ago, I went to one of the World Series games that the San Francisco Giants was playing on up at, I guess it's Oracle Park now in San Francisco. And of course, the game doesn't get over till like 10:30, and I live about an hour and a half back, and took the BART down the peninsula as far as I could go. Got in my car, realized that I was low on gas, stopped to get gas, and put my iPhone on the top of the car, on the roof. Don't do that.
No.
And I was tired, sleepy. I got in my car, or filled it up with gas, got in my car, drove off. And all the time I was thinking that the phone was laying on the seat next to me. Got home, my phone's not there. And I'm going, wait a minute, what's the matter? And so I was tired. It was about 2:00 in the morning by then. Went to sleep, got up the next morning, went out to my car, and the phone was there. It wasn't on the floor, it wasn't on the seat, it wasn't any place there. So at that time, there was the Find My iPhone app on my Macintosh. By the way, I don't know if you can hear my cat in the background.
Yes.
He's almost 19 years old, and he just lost his sister about 3 weeks ago.
Oh.
And he vocalizes. He'll calm down. I'm not beating him. So back to my story, and I found the phone was laying on the side of the entrance to the freeway. So I got in my car, drove up there, and because I had been in the Civil Air Patrol when I was in high school, I knew how to set up a search pattern, and wandered through the ice rows on the side of the road, thinking about centrifugal force. And I'm going, wait a minute, the Find My iPhone showed it on the inside of the curve. It should be on the outside. So I looked up, and there it was laying face down on the other side of the entrance ramp. Looked to check the traffic, ran across, grabbed the phone, ran back, looked at it, and the screen was all smashed up. And I had just bought this iPhone like 2-3 weeks before, paid like $600-700. And sure, the Apple products are more expensive than similar products, but they just work, and Apple supports them. So I remember there was a movie back, I think in the 60s, called It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World. And Jonathan Winters, who is a famous comedian, and in fact, when I went down to the Apollo launch I talked about earlier on Air Force Two, it was actually Air Force One, which I think is hanging in the Reagan Library now. Jonathan Winters was there, and he was telling jokes all the way up and down and back. And in that movie, Jonathan was crying terribly after something had happened. I don't remember. So that's the way I felt driving from the peninsula down to the Apple store in Los Gatos. And I walked in and checked in, and I showed them the phone with the screen smashed. And they said, okay, fine. And I explained to them what I did, and I smashed the thing up. And they said, we don't care how you broke the screen. The screen is broken. We're going to give you a brand new phone.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah. And you compare and contrast that with Microsoft in the mid 2000s. Where I would, being a product manager, I would always find a bug, and I was doing a lot of video production and audio production, and I would be using a lot of CPU power, such that I would have to have two PCs on my desk at the same time. One would be rebooting while I was doing work on the other one. And that's part. And I call them up, and I find a bug, and they wanted me to pay them $200. Finding their bug. They wouldn't support Microsoft Windows software, which, by the way, is the leading way that hackers or ransomware get into systems. So that's why I say, from a branding standpoint, the new tagline for Microsoft should be helping more people feel more stupid than any other company in the world.
I'm not a huge fan of Microsoft. I had Hotmail for years. It was so hot that it kept getting hacked, and I just so yeah, it's pretty crazy, the concept of we're going to sell you something and see you around.
Yeah. Well, Facebook was a lot like that too. You can't talk to anybody there for support. My daughter had her Instagram account hacked. I lost all of her pictures for like 2 or 3 years, even to the point where I suggested she FedEx a letter to Zuckerberg. No response. They could care less about your data, which is the most important thing about your computers, is your data. All they care about is what websites you visited so they could throw up more ads in order for them to make more money, not your privacy.
That's the whole bottom line for sure. And I'm not a huge fan of Facebook for that reason. I kind of show up when I feel like it, but put my podcasts on a few of my 7 business Facebook pages. But other than that, no, it's pretty disturbing, quite frankly. However, on the positive side, you have helped companies build insanely great products on Amazon. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's one of my books on Amazon, which talks about the 5 keys to product success and what I've learned with all the products and services, hardware and software, that I've been a product manager or a more senior manager on over the past 50 years. And then there's another book for managers of product management, organizing and managing insanely great products. And then I wrote a little pamphlet that Wiley, the book publisher, the oldest educational book publisher in the world, published, which is a successful product management and toolkit, which is only 796 pages long. And it goes through the entire product lifecycle in detail. And it too is available up on Amazon. So you can get direct links to it if you go to my website, spicecatalyst.com. Or if you go to Amazon, just look up my name, David Fradin, and all the books that I've written will be listed there.
And that was my next question, is actually, how can I help you? So that would be the best source would be spicecatalyst.com, not Spice, right. Not the Spice Cadillac I saw driving down the street the other day.
Well, they sell spices door to door.
Oh, right. Yeah. That's another little side gig, little side hustle. Well, that's fantastic. I really appreciate, David, you being with me today. It's been fascinating. And unfortunately, the clock keeps ticking and we've blasted right through our time together. But I'm so appreciative of you working with me on this podcast, sharing some great stories. I'm sure with your background and experience, we could go on for 2 or 3 more hours. Get your dad's book written. That'd be awesome. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that'd be great. When I was in high school, I didn't do too hot in the history class because the basketball coach was the teacher. And let's just say he was better at basketball coaching. So anyway, all that to say, I love history. The history that you've shared today is priceless. One more question real quick. What was your very first job when you were a kid?
I was an electrician. At 14 years old, I had wired my father's basement. So neighbors would hire me to come over and do their electrical work. Then I became a carpet installer. And then I became a short order cook at a submarine sandwich shop. And then I became a small appliance salesman at local New York department store out of Detroit, which is where I grew up. And then I became an apprentice plumber in college because my dad was a plumber, and it was a recession at the time. It was the only job I could have. And that's after I was a meat cutter for the Detroit News cafeteria. And then by that time, after starting the flying club, I had my flight instructor's rating. So the last couple of years, I worked through my college expenses by teaching people how to fly. So it was exciting to go out and do inadvertent spins with my students near the Ann Arbor airport, and then that afternoon go to an English grammar class.
Other than that, you were doing nothing. I was selling flower seeds door to door when I was 12, and then I was newspaper route, and then I was selling built-in swimming pools for a swimming pool store down the street from my house, where they let me work in the store and sell all the the floats and the rafty things. And my younger brother was running the backhoe to dig the holes for the pools. And then onward from there, all different jobs and experiences, which all add up. And it's amazing I can remember all this stuff since I can't remember anything from yesterday. So, David, it has been a blast. So I'm thankful you could be with me today. Thanks so much. And we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for putting up with me.
I'm Dave Henning with the Fresh Start Podcast. Once again, fresh ideas for business and personal growth. And we're very grateful having David with us today. Thanks a lot.